The old man in dirty overalls had no idea that fixing one broken bike would change two lives forever. Marcus Chen wiped the grease from his weathered hands as he watched the 12-year-old boy struggle to push his battered bicycle up the steep hill toward his garage. The rear wheel wobbled dangerously, chain hanging loose like a broken promise. The kid's school uniform was wrinkled, his backpack patched with duct tape, and his shoes had seen better days 3 years ago. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. "Hey there, son," Marcus called out, stepping from the shadowy interior of Chen's auto repair. "That bike giving you trouble?" The boy stopped, shoulders sagging with exhaustion and something deeper. Defeat, maybe. His name was Tyler, though Marcus didn't know it yet. All he saw was a kid who looked like he'd been carrying the weight of the world on his narrow shoulders for far too long. "It's okay, mister," Tyler said quietly, not meeting his eyes. "I can walk it home." But Marcus had been watching this same scene play out for 3 weeks now. Every afternoon, same time, same struggle. The boy pushing that dying bicycle past his shop, never asking for help, never complaining, just enduring. Something about it reminded Marcus of himself at that age, though his circumstances had been different, very different. "Well, I'm heading inside for some coffee anyway," Marcus said, his voice gentle but firm. "Why don't you bring that bike in? Let me take a quick look." "No charge." Tyler's head snapped up, suspicion flickering across his young face. "I don't have any money." "Did I ask for any?" The garage smelled of motor oil, metal shavings, and decades of honest work. Tools hung in precise rows on pegboard walls, each one worn smooth by countless hours in Marcus's capable hands. He built this place from nothing, one repair at a time, one satisfied customer at a time. It wasn't much to look at, squeezed between a laundromat and a convenience store on the forgotten side of Riverside Avenue, but it was his. Tyler wheeled the bike inside, his eyes wide as he took in the organized chaos. Classic cars in various stages of restoration occupied 3 of the 4 bays. A cherry-red 1967 Mustang gleamed under the fluorescent lights, its hood open to reveal an engine so clean you could eat off it. "Wow," Tyler breathed, momentarily forgetting his troubles. "You work on all these?" Marcus nodded, already kneeling beside the boy's bicycle. "Cars, bikes, motorcycles. If it's got wheels and an engine, I can probably fix it. And if it's got wheels and no engine," he gestured to the bicycle, "well, that's even easier." The bike was worse up close. The frame was solid enough, an old Schwinn that had probably been beautiful once, but everything else was held together by determination and prayer. The brake cables were frayed, the chain was stretched beyond belief, and the rear derailleur hung at an angle that defied physics. "How long have you been riding this?" Marcus asked, running his hands along the frame with the practiced touch of someone who understood machines on an almost spiritual level. "About 2 years, Tyler said, shifting uncomfortably, "since my mom got sick." There it was, the weight Marcus had seen in the boy's shoulders. He didn't push for details, didn't pry. Some stories came out in their own time, if they came out at all. "Your mom picked this out for you?" Tyler's face softened slightly. "Yeah. From a garage sale. She said it just needed some love." His voice dropped. She always said that about broken things, that they just needed some love. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. He'd heard those exact words before, a lifetime ago, from someone who'd believed in fixing broken things too. Someone who'd believed in fixing him. "Smart woman," he said simply. She was right. This bike's got good bones. Everything else, well, that's just parts. Parts can be replaced. For the next hour, Tyler watched in fascination as Marcus worked. The old mechanic moved with the fluid precision of someone who'd spent 40 years with his hands deep in engines, and his mind focused on solving problems. He didn't just fix things. He understood them, spoke their language, coaxed them back to life with patience and skill. "Why are you doing this?" Tyler asked suddenly. "I mean, really, you don't know me." Marcus paused, holding a new brake cable up to the light to check for defects. How could he explain that sometimes you helped people not because you knew them, but because you remembered what it felt like to need help? That sometimes kindness was less about the recipient and more about honoring the kindness you'd received when you needed it most. "My grandfather owned a shop like this," Marcus said instead. "In Chinatown, back when I was about your age. I used to hang around after school, getting in his way, asking a million questions. One day I asked him why he always gave free repairs to the neighborhood kids, bikes. You know what he told me?" Tyler shook his head. He said, "Marcus, a bicycle is freedom. It's how a kid gets to school, to friends, to possibilities. You take that away, you take away hope. We fix bikes, but really, we fix dreams." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Tyler looked down at his hands, trying to process the idea that someone might care about his dreams, his possibilities, his hope. "What happened to your grandfather?" Tyler asked quietly. Marcus's hand stilled on the bike. "He passed when I was 16, left me the shop. By then, I thought I knew everything." A bitter smile crossed his weathered face. "Turns out I didn't know anything." But that was a story for another time. Maybe a story he'd never tell. As the sun began to set, painting the garage in golden hues, Marcus made the final adjustments to Tyler's bicycle. New brake cables, fresh chain, properly aligned wheels, even a small bell mounted on the handlebars. The old Schwinn looked like it had been reborn. "Try it out," Marcus said, wheeling it toward the open bay door. Tyler climbed on, and for the first time in months, maybe years, Marcus saw him smile. A real smile. The kind that started in the eyes and spread across his whole face like sunrise. The bike responded beautifully, smooth and quiet, carrying the boy in gentle circles around the small parking area. "It's perfect," Tyler said, coasting to a stop. "It's absolutely perfect." "Good bikes deserve good riders," Marcus replied. "You take care of it, it'll take care of you." Tyler climbed off, suddenly serious again. "I'll pay you back. I don't know how, but I will. The only payment I want is for you to ride safe, and maybe, when you're older and you see some kids struggling with a broken bike, you remember this moment. You help them out. That's how kindness works. It travels." As Tyler rode away into the gathering dusk, Marcus stood in his doorway and watched until the boy disappeared around the corner. Something about the encounter had stirred up memories he usually kept buried deep. Memories of his own childhood, of struggles and kindness received, of choices made and chances lost. Marcus Chen hadn't always been a small-town mechanic with grease under his fingernails and oil stains on his clothes. Once upon a time, he'd been Marcus Chen, MIT graduate, aerospace engineer, rising star at Morrison Dynamics, one of the country's most prestigious defense contractors. He'd worn $1,000 suits, driven European sports cars, lived in a glass tower that scraped the Boston sky. He'd also been married to Sarah, brilliant and beautiful Sarah, who'd shared his dreams of changing the world through innovation and technology. They'd planned their future in precise detail: the house in Cambridge, the children who would inherit their combined genius, the legacy they'd build together in steel and circuits and revolutionary ideas. But life had other plans. The project that destroyed everything was called Prometheus, a guidance system for military aircraft that was supposed to be Marcus's masterpiece, the innovation that would make his career and secure their future. He'd worked 18-hour days for 2 years, poured his soul into every line of code, Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Circuit pathway, every mathematical calculation. The test flight was supposed to be routine. A simple demonstration for Pentagon officials. A chance to show off what American ingenuity could accomplish. Marcus watched from the control room, pride swelling in his chest as the prototype aircraft performed flawlessly, responding to his guidance system with precision that bordered on artistry. Then something went wrong. A cascade failure that shouldn't have been possible, couldn't have been possible according to every simulation they'd run. The aircraft went into an unrecoverable spin, the pilot unable to regain control. Marcus watched in horror as his creation, his masterpiece, plowed into the ground at 300 miles per hour. The pilot's name was Captain James Morrison. He was 28 years old, married, father of twin daughters who were just learning to walk. He died instantly. The investigation that followed was thorough and merciless. No evidence of sabotage, no manufacturing defects, no external factors. Just a mathematical error buried so deep in Marcus's code that it had taken 3 independent review teams to find it. A single misplaced decimal point that had turned his guidance system into a death trap. Legally, Marcus was protected. The military accepted full responsibility, sealed the records, quietly buried the program. But morally, ethically, emotionally, he was destroyed. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Captain Morrison's photograph, saw those twin daughters who would grow up without their father because Marcus Chen had been too arrogant, too confident, too sure of his own brilliance to double-check his work. Sarah tried to help him through it. Therapy, medication, time away from work. But Marcus was drowning in guilt and self-recrimination, and drowning men pull down everyone who tries to save them. Their marriage became another casualty of his failure, another good thing destroyed by his hubris. The day Sarah moved out of their Cambridge apartment, she left a note on the kitchen counter. "I still love you, Marcus, but I can't watch you destroy yourself anymore. Get help. Find a way to forgive yourself, because James Morrison's daughters need their father back, but they also need you to stop punishing yourself for being human." Marcus read that note 1,000 times before he finally understood what she meant. Captain Morrison was gone, and nothing could bring him back, but his daughters deserved better than to have their father's death be the defining tragedy of Marcus's life. They deserved to have it mean something. So Marcus quit Morrison Dynamics, sold everything he owned, and disappeared. For 2 years he wandered the country, working odd jobs, trying to figure out how to live with what he'd done. He washed dishes in Seattle, painted houses in Phoenix, picked fruit in California's Central Valley. Honest work, simple work, work that couldn't hurt anyone except himself. Eventually, he ended up in Riverside, a small town where nobody knew his story and nobody asked questions. He used the last of his savings to buy the failing auto repair shop from an old man who was ready to retire. It wasn't engineering, wasn't innovation, wasn't changing the world, but it was helping people, one repair at a time, one problem solved at a time, and for 15 years that had been enough. Until today, when a boy with a broken bicycle had walked into his shop and reminded him of all the reasons he'd become an engineer in the first place. The desire to fix things, to solve problems, to make life a little easier for people who were struggling. 3 blocks away, Tyler Chen was discovering that a properly functioning bicycle could indeed feel like freedom. The ride home that usually took 30 minutes of walking and pushing was accomplished in less than 10 minutes of smooth, effortless cycling. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't exhausted when he reached the small apartment he shared with his mother. Tyler's story was different from Marcus's, but no less shaped by loss and struggle. 2 years ago, his mother Elena had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. The disease had progressed quickly, stealing her strength, her coordination, her ability to work the demanding double shifts that had kept them afloat after his father left. Elena Rodriguez had been a proud woman, the kind who worked 3 jobs if necessary to pay her own way, who never asked for help and rarely accepted it when offered. She'd raised Tyler to be the same way, to stand on his own feet, to earn what he received, to never be a burden on anyone. But MS didn't care about pride or independence. It cared only about destroying nerve pathways, about turning simple tasks into monumental challenges, about transforming a vibrant single mother into someone who needed help opening jars and climbing stairs. The medical bills had come first. A tsunami of paperwork and co-pays and treatments that weren't quite covered by their basic insurance. Then Elena had lost her job at the packaging plant, her hands too unreliable to work the assembly line safely. Disability payments helped, but they were a fraction of what she'd earned working. Tyler had watched his mother's pride crumble piece by piece as their savings disappeared, as they moved from their comfortable house to a smaller apartment, as she began accepting charity from the church and community organizations she'd once donated to herself. I'm supposed to be taking care of you," she'd whispered one night when she thought he was asleep. "I'm supposed to be the strong one." Tyler had pretended not to hear, but the words had carved themselves into his heart. From that moment, he'd appointed himself the man of the house, taking on every responsibility he could handle and several he couldn't. He'd learned to cook, to clean, to manage their limited finances with the precision of an accountant. The bicycle had been Elena's attempt to give him back some piece of childhood, some small freedom in a life that had become defined by adult responsibilities. She'd found it at a garage sale, spent $20 they couldn't really afford, and presented it to him with the kind of smile that pretended everything was going to be fine. Tyler had ridden it gratefully, never complaining when the chains slipped or the brakes failed, never mentioning that it was too small for his growing frame or that the other kids at school whispered about his junkie bike behind his back. His mother had given him the gift of mobility, and he'd accepted it with the grace she'd taught him. But now, pedaling smoothly through the evening air on a bicycle that worked like it was supposed to work, Tyler felt something he'd almost forgotten existed. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy in movement and speed, in the simple pleasure of a machine that responded to his efforts with reliable precision. He coasted into the apartment complex parking lot just as his neighbor Mrs. Patterson was struggling with her grocery bags. Without thinking, Tyler hopped off his bike and jogged over to help. "Why, thank you, Tyler," she said, genuinely surprised. Usually the boy was too tired and overwhelmed to notice anyone else's struggles. "You seem different tonight." "Happier." "Someone fixed my bike," Tyler said simply, as if that explained everything. And maybe it did. As he climbed the stairs to their second-floor apartment, Tyler found himself thinking about the old mechanic who'd spent hours working on a stranger's bicycle without asking for anything in return. Marcus, his name was. Tyler had seen the nameplate on his desk, had noticed the careful way he treated every tool, every part, every component, as if it mattered. There had been something familiar about Marcus, though Tyler couldn't quite place what it was. Maybe it was the way he worked with such focused intensity, or the way he spoke about fixing things as if it were a sacred responsibility. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was just the first time in years that an adult had looked at Tyler and seen potential instead of problems. Elena was sitting at their small kitchen table when he came in, her laptop open to yet another medical billing website, her face creased with the concentration required to navigate insurance bureaucracy. She looked up when he entered, and her expression immediately brightened. "You're glowing," she said, closing the laptop. "What happened?" Tyler told her about Marcus, about the repair, about the kindness of a stranger who'd asked for nothing, but had given everything. Elena listened with tears in her eyes, remembering her own father who'd been the kind of man who helped neighborhood children just because it was the right thing to do. "I want to do something for him," Tyler said, "to say thank you properly. But I don't know what." Elena smiled, the first real smile Tyler had seen from her in weeks. "Sometimes the best thank you is just being worthy of the kindness you received. Ride that bike with joy, baby. That's all the payment a man like that wants." But Tyler wasn't satisfied with that answer. As he lay in bed that night, listening to his mother's labored breathing in the next room, he made a decision. He would find a way to repay Marcus Chen, not because the mechanic expected it, but because Tyler's own sense of justice demanded it. Good deeds should be rewarded, kindness should be acknowledged, and people who fixed broken things deserve to have their own broken pieces mended. He just had no idea how one 12-year-old boy with no money and no connections could possibly help a grown man who seemed to have everything he needed. But Tyler had learned that determination could overcome a lot of obstacles, and he had determination in abundance. The next morning, Tyler rode his perfectly functioning bicycle to school for the first time in months. The difference was immediately apparent, not just in his arrival time, but in his energy level. He wasn't exhausted from fighting with a mechanical disaster. He was alert, engaged, ready to learn. His homeroom teacher, Mrs. Williams, noticed the change immediately. Tyler had always been a bright student, but lately he'd been distracted, tired, struggling to keep up with assignments, while managing his responsibilities at home. Today he was different, focused, present. "New bike?" she asked as the students filed in for first period. "Fixed bike," Tyler corrected, and the pride in his voice was unmistakable. During lunch, Tyler found himself at the library computer, researching Marcus Chen and Chen's auto repair. The search results were sparse. A basic business listing. A few positive reviews from satisfied customers. Nothing that revealed much about the man who'd transformed Tyler's life with a few hours of patient work. But there was one result that made Tyler's heart race. A newspaper article from 15 years ago, archived in the Boston Globe's database. The headline read, "MIT engineer leaves defense contractor after military aircraft accident." Tyler clicked the link, and his world shifted. The article was brief, focused more on the technical aspects of the accident than the human cost. But it mentioned Marcus Chen by name, described him as a rising star in aerospace engineering who'd, quote, resigned his position following the tragic loss of test pilot Captain James Morrison. Tyler read the article 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of complexity. The brilliant engineer who'd walked away from a prestigious career, the accident that had cost a man his life, the resignation that must have meant sacrificing everything Marcus had worked for. Suddenly, the careful way Marcus treated every repair made sense. The precision, the attention to detail, the refusal to cut corners or accept good enough as an answer. This wasn't just a mechanic fixing bikes. This was a man seeking redemption, one repair at a time. Tyler spent the rest of the day thinking about what he'd learned. By the time school ended, he'd made another decision. He wouldn't confront Marcus with this knowledge, wouldn't violate the privacy of a man who'd clearly chosen to leave his past behind. But he would find a way to honor both the Marcus who'd been and the Marcus who'd become. That afternoon, instead of riding straight home, Tyler detoured past Chen's auto repair. The garage was busy, all 4 bays occupied with projects in various stages of completion. Marcus was bent over the engine of a pickup truck, his movements as precise and purposeful as they'd been the day before. Tyler watched from across the street, trying to reconcile the image of the small-town mechanic with the MIT graduate who'd once designed guidance systems for military aircraft. How did someone make that transition? How did someone go from creating cutting-edge technology to rebuilding transmissions in a strip mall garage? The answer, Tyler realized, was the same way someone learned to live with MS or learned to be 12 years old and responsible for taking care of his mother. One day at a time. One choice at a time. One small act of courage or kindness or simple persistence at a time. As he pedaled home, Tyler began formulating a plan. It was ambitious, maybe impossible, but it felt right in a way that few things had felt right in his life. If Marcus Chen had given him the gift of mobility, then Tyler would give Marcus something equally valuable in return. He just needed to figure out exactly what that something was. The opportunity came 3 weeks later, in the form of a familiar black sedan that pulled into the parking lot of Chen's auto repair on a Tuesday afternoon. Tyler happened to be riding past when he saw it, happened to be close enough to overhear the conversation that followed. The man who emerged from the sedan was tall, expensively dressed, with the kind of confident bearing that suggested he was accustomed to being the most important person in any room he entered. Tyler recognized him immediately, though they'd never met. Richard Morrison, founder and CEO of Morrison Dynamics, one of the largest defense contractors in the country. Tyler knew this because he'd spent the last 3 weeks researching everything he could find about Marcus Chen's former life. Morrison Dynamics had been Marcus's employer, the company whose military contract had ended in tragedy, the place where Marcus's old life had died along with Captain James Morrison. And Captain James Morrison, Tyler had learned, had been Richard Morrison's son. Tyler quickly steered his bike behind a parked van, close enough to hear but hidden from view. His heart was pounding as he watched the 2 men face each other across 15 years of silence and guilt. "Hello, Marcus," Richard Morrison said, his voice carefully neutral. Marcus straightened slowly, his hands still holding the wrench he'd been using to adjust a carburetor. For a long moment he said nothing, just studied the face of the man whose son had died because of his mistake. "Mr. Morrison," Marcus replied finally, "I didn't expect to see you here." "I didn't expect to find you here either. It took my investigators 6 months to track you down." Richard's eyes swept the garage, taking in the tools, the cars, the complete transformation of the man who'd once been considered the most promising engineer of his generation. This is quite a change from your old office." Marcus set down his wrench, wiped his hands on a shop rag, and gave Richard his full attention. "What do you want?" "To talk. There are things that need to be said." Tyler held his breath, pressing himself deeper into his hiding spot. This was the confrontation he'd read about in newspaper archives, the meeting between two men whose lives had been forever changed by one terrible moment. "I think everything that needed to be said was said 15 years ago," Marcus replied. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Morrison. I'm sorry for my part in it. But I can't bring James back, and punishing myself hasn't made anything better." Richard Morrison studied Marcus for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You think I'm here for an apology? Aren't you?" To Tyler's surprise, Richard Morrison laughed. Not with humor, but with something that might have been exhaustion or resignation or relief. "Marcus, I've spent 15 years being angry. Angry at you, angry at the military, angry at the universe for taking my son away from me. Do you know what that kind of anger does to a person?" Marcus nodded slowly. "It destroys everything good in your life." "Exactly. My marriage didn't survive it. My relationship with my daughter barely did. I built Morrison Dynamics into an empire. But I lost my family in the process. All because I couldn't let go of something that was already gone." Tyler felt his chest tighten. This wasn't the confrontation he'd expected, the angry father demanding justice from the man who'd killed his son. This was something more complex, more human. "So why are you here?" Marcus asked, and Tyler could hear the genuine confusion in his voice. Richard Morrison reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder. "Because 3 weeks ago my daughter gave me this." He handed the folder to Marcus, who opened it with obvious reluctance. Tyler couldn't see what was inside, but he could see Marcus's reaction. The engineer's face went white, then red, then settled into an expression of stunned disbelief. "Where did you get this?" Marcus whispered. "My granddaughters, James's girls. They're in college now, studying engineering. MIT, actually, following in their father's footsteps." Richard's voice softened. "They've been researching the accident for a class project, and they found something the military investigators missed." Marcus looked up from the folder, his eyes wide. "This can't be right." "It is. The failure wasn't in your code, Marcus. It was in the hardware interface, a manufacturing defect in the processing unit that created a feedback loop under very specific conditions. Your mathematics were perfect. Your programming was flawless. My son died because of a 50-cent capacitor that was installed backward on an assembly line in Ohio." The silence that followed was profound. Tyler could hear his own heartbeat, could hear the distant hum of traffic, could hear Marcus's sharp intake of breath as 15 years of guilt began to crumble. "I destroyed my life for nothing," Marcus said, his voice barely audible. "You destroyed your life because you cared," Richard corrected. "Because you took responsibility for something that wasn't your fault. Because you're a good man who couldn't live with the idea that your work had cost someone their life, even when it hadn't." Marcus sank onto a nearby stool, the folder still clutched in his hands. "I don't understand. Why are you telling me this now? Why didn't you tell me 15 years ago?" "Because I didn't know 15 years ago. Because I was too angry to look beyond my own pain. Because I needed someone to blame, and you were convenient." Richard's voice carried the weight of profound regret. "My granddaughters asked me why I'd never tried to contact the engineer who'd worked on their father's aircraft. They wanted to know if you were okay, if you'd gotten help, if anyone had ever told you that the investigation's conclusions were wrong." Tyler felt tears running down his cheeks. The story was more complicated than he'd imagined, more heartbreaking and more hopeful at the same time. "I need to ask you something," Richard continued. "My daughters are looking for a consulting engineer for their senior project. Something about developing better guidance systems for civilian aircraft. They specifically requested you." Marcus looked up, confusion evident on his face. "Me? But I haven't worked in aerospace for 15 years. "No, but you've been solving mechanical problems for 15 years. You've been taking broken things and making them work again. That's exactly the kind of experience they need." Richard paused, then added, "And it's exactly the kind of work their father would have wanted you to do." Tyler watched as Marcus struggled with the implications of what he was hearing. Redemption, opportunity, the chance to honor a dead pilot's memory by helping his daughter succeed. But also the risk of reopening old wounds, of returning to a world that had once destroyed him. "I don't know," Marcus said finally. "I'm not the same person I was." "Neither am I," Richard replied. "Neither are any of us. But maybe that's the point. Maybe we're better now. Maybe we've learned something from our pain that we can use to help other people." They talked for another 20 minutes, working through details, addressing concerns, slowly building a bridge across 15 years of separation and misunderstanding. Tyler listened to every word, his heart swelling with something that felt like pride. This was what kindness looked like when it traveled. Marcus had fixed Tyler's bike out of simple human decency, never expecting anything in return. But that act of generosity had led Tyler to research Marcus's story, which had led to this moment of unexpected redemption. As Richard Morrison drove away, Tyler emerged from his hiding spot and approached the garage. Marcus was still sitting on the stool, still holding the folder, still processing what had just happened. "Hey, Mr. Chen," Tyler called out, trying to sound casual. Marcus looked up, and Tyler was surprised to see tears in the older man's eyes. "Tyler, good to see you. How's the bike running?" "Perfect. Just like you said it would." Tyler paused, then took a deep breath. "I heard some of what just happened. I hope that's okay." Marcus studied the boy's face, seeing something there that hadn't been there before. Maturity, maybe. Understanding. "How much did you hear?" "Enough to know that you're a good man who deserves good things. And enough to know that sometimes the universe finds ways to make things right, even when it takes 15 years. Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile Tyler had seen from him. "You know what? I think you might be right about that." As Tyler rode home that evening, he thought about the strange chain of events that had brought Marcus Chen and Richard Morrison back together. A broken bike, a generous mechanic, a curious boy with access to the internet, and a pair of college students who'd refused to accept their grandfather's version of their father's death. It wasn't the dramatic intervention Tyler had imagined when he'd first learned about Marcus's past. There had been no grand gesture, no public vindication, no Hollywood moment of triumph. Just two men talking through their shared pain and finding a way forward that honored the memory of someone they'd both lost. But maybe that was how real healing worked. Not through grand gestures, but through small acts of kindness that rippled outward in unexpected directions. Not through dramatic revelations, but through patient research and stubborn love, and the simple refusal to give up on people who deserved better. 6 months later, Tyler stood in the parking lot of Chen's Auto Repair, watching as Marcus loaded a set of blueprints into the passenger seat of his car. The consulting work with Morrison Dynamics had led to other opportunities: speaking engagements, teaching positions at the local community college. Marcus was still a mechanic, still fixed bikes for neighborhood kids, but he was also an engineer again, using his skills to solve problems and create solutions. The transformation hadn't been instant or easy. There had been panic attacks, sleepless nights, moments when the weight of returning to his old field felt overwhelming. But Marcus had persevered, supported by Richard Morrison's friendship, by the enthusiasm of James Morrison's daughters, and by the quiet confidence of a 12-year-old boy who'd reminded him that broken things could be fixed. "Ready for the big presentation?" Tyler asked, adjusting his tie. He was dressed in his best clothes, the same outfit he'd worn to his middle school graduation a week earlier. Marcus grinned. "Are you kidding? I've got my lucky charm with me. How can I lose?" Tyler had insisted on accompanying Marcus to the final presentation of the guidance system project he'd been consulting on. It was being held at Morrison Dynamics headquarters in Boston, a full-circle moment that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. As they drove toward the airport, Tyler thought about all the changes the past year had brought. His mother's health had stabilized, partly due to a new treatment program that was covered by the insurance policy she'd received when she started working part-time for Chen's Auto Repair. Marcus had hired her to handle his bookkeeping and correspondence, work she could do from home when the MS symptoms flared up. The job had given Elena more than just income. It had given her purpose, dignity, a way to contribute that worked within the limitations of her disease. She'd also become something of a surrogate mother to Marcus, cooking him dinner when he worked late, listening to his concerns about returning to engineering, offering the kind of emotional support he'd been missing since his divorce. For Tyler, the changes had been even more profound. Marcus had become his mentor, teaching him about engines and mathematics, about precision and patience, about the satisfaction that came from solving problems and helping people. They'd spent countless hours together in the garage, Tyler learning to use tools and Marcus learning to trust again. "You know what the best part about all this is?" Marcus said as they pulled into the airport parking garage. "What?" "I get to be Uncle Marcus to 2 more kids. James Morrison's daughters want me to meet their children. Richard's been sending me pictures." Marcus's voice was soft with wonder. "A year ago, I thought I was defined by the worst mistake of my life. Now I'm defined by the family I never expected to have." Tyler smiled, thinking about the strange mathematics of forgiveness, the way pain could be transformed into purpose, the way kindness could multiply across generations. The presentation at Morrison Dynamics was a triumph. Marcus's guidance system design was elegant, innovative, and absolutely bulletproof. He'd learned from his earlier mistake, building in multiple redundancies and fail-safes, creating something that was both cutting-edge and completely reliable. But the real triumph was smaller, more personal. Tyler watched from the back of the conference room as Marcus shook hands with Richard Morrison, as they laughed together like old friends instead of bitter enemies. He saw the photos on Richard's desk, pictures of James Morrison's daughters and their children, the grandchildren who would grow up knowing their grandfather not as a man consumed by anger, but as someone who'd learned to transform his loss into love. After the presentation, as they walked through the corridors of Morrison Dynamics, Marcus stopped in front of a memorial wall dedicated to employees who died in service to their country. Captain James Morrison's photograph was there, young and smiling, wearing his dress uniform with obvious pride. "I used to have nightmares about him," Marcus said quietly. "Imagined him angry, disappointed, accusing me of destroying his family's future." "What do you think now?" Tyler asked. Marcus studied the photograph for a long moment. "I think he'd be proud of his daughters. I think he'd be happy that his father and I found our way back to friendship. And I think he'd understand that sometimes the most important thing you can do is forgive yourself for being human." As they prepared to leave Boston and return to their small town, Tyler felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He'd set out to repay a kindness, to find some way to help the man who'd fixed his bicycle. Instead, he'd learned something more valuable than any debt repayment. Kindness wasn't a transaction. It wasn't something you gave in order to receive something in return. Kindness was a gift that kept giving, traveling from person to person, generation to generation, creating connections and possibilities that no one could predict or control. Marcus had fixed Tyler's bike because it was the right thing to do. Tyler had researched Marcus's story because he wanted to understand the man who'd helped him. That research had indirectly led to Marcus's redemption, to Richard Morrison's healing, to the restoration of relationships that had been broken for 15 years. None of it had been planned. All of it had been necessary. As their plane lifted off from Logan Airport, Tyler looked down at the city where Marcus had once lost everything and smiled. Tomorrow, Marcus would return to his garage, would continue fixing cars and bicycles for his neighbors, would teach Tyler more about engines and life. But he would also continue consulting on engineering projects, bridging his 2 worlds with the wisdom that comes from understanding both success and failure, both pride and humility. Sometimes the most powerful changes begin not with grand gestures, but with a simple act of generosity. Marcus had fixed a broken bicycle, never knowing his kindness would help fix a broken life in return. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.